To introduce the next section on the impact of culture upon holy living, I draw your attention to a recent news story that made the rounds on the national news services. This particular one was January the 8th. The glasses make a difference here. And that was through Fox News. Meanest mom on the planet sells teen son's car after finding booze under seat. Did you see that one? If you didn't, allow me, from Des Moines, Iowa, Jane Hambleton has dubbed herself the meanest mom on the planet. After finding alcohol in her teen son's car, she decided to sell the car and share her 19-year-old's misdeeds with everyone by placing an ad in the local newspaper, the Des Moines Register. The ad reads, "Olds 1999 intrigue, totally uncool parents who obviously don't love teenage son selling his car. Only driven for 3 weeks before Snoopy mom who needs to get a life found booze under the front seat. $3,700 or best offer. Call meanest mom on the planet," the article read. Since placing the ad, Hamilton heard from nearly 100 people besides interested buyers just who wanted to express their appreciation for the stand that she took. "The ad cost a fortune," she said, "but you know what? I'm telling people what happened here. I'm not just going to put the car for resale when there's nothing wrong with it, except that the driver made a dumb decision." You see, before they bought the car, she had an agreement with her son that said, always the car has to be locked and no alcohol under any circumstances. It's overwhelming the number of calls that she's gotten from people saying, "Thank you, it's nice to see a responsible parent." So far, there have been no calls from anyone saying, "You know, you're too strict, lady, you're really overboard." The only critic is her son, who she says is very, very unhappy with the ad and claims that the alcohol was left by a passenger. You've heard that one before. Hambleton believes her son, but has decided that mercy isn't the best policy in this case. In this section, I'm going to begin with a good report, and I'm going to end with a good report. But in between, I'm going to ask you to do a reality check with me as we look at some of the impact of the culture upon holy living, particularly upon the church and upon the generation of students that we're working with presently. And I'm going to identify just four. There are many more hurdles to holy living than these, and I'll just mention these briefly, and you'll nod your head because you'll know exactly what I'm referencing here. The first is relativism, and that is that there are no moral absolutes. Truth is whatever you believe it to be. We ran into this a few years ago as my son was attending Lakewood High School. He was participating in the International Baccalaureate program, and there he was with the brightest of the bright of teenagers in Jefferson County who wanted a top academic prep program. And we had many conversations as he was encountering very, very bright young people who were coming from entirely a relativistic perspective, and it was expressed. One particular example comes to my mind, and that was when he had a conversation with his friends around the topic of life after death. And the mood of the day is, it is whatever you believe that it is. And their belief, his group of friends, was that when you die, your body goes in the ground, it rots, and you get eaten by worms. And anything beyond that is whatever it is to you. And so whatever you believe becomes your reality. And that was the mood of the day. You might say, well, that's certainly not the case with CCU students. I would just ask you to consider, why did we have to have a strategic objective a few months ago on teaching students to trust the Bible? That comes directly out of the impact of culture upon young people, even young people in the church. A second hurdle is tolerance. And tolerance says, whatever you believe is right for you is fine by me. Who am I to judge? And the key word here is the word whatever. I learned the word whatever in the early 80s when I was attending seminary in Northern California. Whatever was the response to any subject or any conversation that came up around the topic of morals. You see, in our age, tolerance is the highest virtue of the times. It's interesting to note that those who most passionately advocate the position of tolerance are the most intolerant when Christians take a stand on a position involving some moral stance. Dr. Mitchell was reminding me a few minutes ago as we were talking that tolerance is a one-way street. What about at CCU? At CCU, I see an increasing movement among our students over the last couple of years toward humanitarian work, at the same time with the reluctance to mention the name of Jesus or to share the gospel. The reason being it's too exclusive, it's too particular, it's divisive. We need to watch not just here, but we need to watch in our culture across the nation an increasing universalism creeping into the church. It's a huge concern and hurdle to holy living. The third hurdle, self-indulgence. And self-indulgence says it's all about me, it's about my needs, it's about my wants. In the Bible, Ecclesiastes, it writes, says, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. You see, personal entitlement is sweeping the land. All of you faculty have seen this in the classroom as you engage in conversations with students. We're seeing many evidences of students who have no other concept, no other worldview other than it's coming through what they want and what they need. When I hear upperclassmen, as I have the last couple of years here, express concern about the me-centeredness of the newer students, I know that we're experiencing a time of rapid change, and the culture is impacting the church and those that are coming to us. Not in this city, but in another city. Recently it was reported that there was a billboard by a community church advertising their presence in the community, and the billboard showed the picture of a young man, and the statement on the billboard was, finally, a church that's all about me. Well, what about here at CCU? Some of you participated last year in our chapel forums. We did a lot of listening last year as there was a good deal of frustration and critique and disgruntlement. And one colleague remarked to me after hearing one of the forums that what they heard throughout all of the comments that came from our student body was me, 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 me. Some of you have faced situations where you've either heard the words or it's been implied, you work for me, coming from students. That's increasingly a hurdle that we're facing. And these three and others result in the fourth hurdle, which is the disconnect. It's a startling disconnect. You can have Christian college students in 1 hour praising God in chapel, and in the next hour involved in attitude, action, behavior that is completely contrary and not even have a sense about the disconnect that's going on there. Or involved in mission work and only a short time later to be involved in something completely contrary to the mission. The classic example I have from here in the university is a professor who had students in the class engaged on the topic of purity and maintaining holy living in a male-female relationship prior to marriage. And two students in the class were particularly vocal in class, and yeah, that's right, and here's why, and so forth. And they were happened to be a dating couple, and it became known to this professor through another context that in private settings they were sharing with others the struggle that they were having with premarital sexual activity in their own relationship. The disconnect is profound in the current population that we're dealing with. Now I want to share a couple of examples from studies that have been done. We get quite a bit of research that is available to us, and I've picked 4 areas: sex, drugs, rock and roll, and the new biggie in my mind, dishonesty. And I'm just going to share a few quick blurbs on some studies that have been done, and then an anecdote for each one of these that we're dealing with here in our community as well. In 2005, the Washington Post reported that 88% of students who make virginity pledges eventually have premarital sex. Now, the majority of those students who make those pledges do so in some sort of a context of a youth group or a camp-type program. 88% eventually participate in premarital sex. And they also have found in studies that the onset of that activity is generally delayed about 18 months. So in other words, the pledge has some effect, but it's a delayed effect rather than an absolute effect. A following study to that from the Heritage Foundation found that in addition, those pledges have the effect of causing students to have less likelihood to engage in risky sexual behavior, such as hiring a prostitute, and other kinds of risky behavior there. And then the Barna Group released a study in 2006. Young adult morality differs from baby boomers. That would be no surprise to you who are parents of teenagers and so forth. A recent survey conducted by the Barna Group compares the morals of adults in their 20s and 30s with those of adults who are 40 and over. The results show a divergence between boomers and busters with regard to 32 factors of morality, most notably 8 related to sex. Younger adults are far more likely to regard sex out of marriage, cohabitation, fantasies, and viewing pornography as morally acceptable. Not just we're doing it, but it's acceptable. Perhaps most disturbing is that those who fit into the born-again Christian category were not very different from their peers with regard to most measures of morality, especially sex. The research shows that young people reflect the morals of their peer group much more significantly than the morals of their faith. Now related to drugs, and specifically here some statistics related to alcohol. Drugs and drinking on the rise. The National Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse has released a report that shows a significant increase in drug use and frequent binge drinking on college campuses. Compared with 15 years ago, most forms of drug use have increased. Of particular note were the increases in prescription pain medications, marijuana, and cocaine. While the percentage of students who drink has remained flat, the number of people who report frequent binge drinking, which is defined as 3 or more times in the previous 2 weeks, increased to nearly 23%. So 23% of students across the country reporting binge drinking. In addition, addiction rates outpace the general population, with 23% of students exhibiting alcohol or drug addiction, compared with just 8.5% of all people 12 and older overall. I don't have time to read it. Another study here actually connects going to college with alcoholism. There's some significant research here in terms of what's happening in the culture and the increase of alcohol there. It's kind of interesting anecdotally here at CCU, responsible drinking with some of our students means that when they're in a context where underage drinking is taking place, they collect the keys of everybody who came in a car, and that is somehow a better way or Christian way to go about underage drinking. Rock and roll. This study says that Americans spend nearly half of their lives engaged with media. According to a prediction by the U.S. Census Bureau, Americans will increase the number of hours spent engaging media, TV, radio, going online, and reading from the 3,333 hours spent in the year 2000 to more than 3,500 hours this year. That's equivalent to 5 months out of the year consuming media. Another study here that connects song lyrics and sexual activity, and role models such as Paris Hilton, Britney Spears, and Lindsay Lohan. Don't have time to read it. You can read it on any of the major news sources, because when you see on CNN, it'll tell you the most popular searches and the most popular news stories, and usually those couple are right up there, usually ahead of the war in Iraq and other issues of concern. Another article here on video game addiction that I won't read, but it says that 80% of students, virtually all males on one college campus, play video games, and nearly 10% of those could be classified as pathologically or clinically addicted to video games. We've had the experience here at CCU over the last couple of years of confronting student leaders about inappropriate content upon their MySpace or Facebook accounts, sometimes innuendo, sexual contact, profane language, and our experience has been when we confront those students, not talking about just general students in the population, but confronting student leaders as to the inappropriateness of that behavior, typically the response is, well, that's the language of our generation, that's just the way we talk. You know, that's my private page. I don't really see that it's any of your business. Never mind that on the same page is Colorado Christian University as their university there. And oftentimes indignation that we would even want to confront them about that, because that's their thing. In the realm of dishonesty, and I'll wrap up with this here, and including in dishonesty, lying, cheating, and deception. An article from the Chicago Tribune from June of 2007, Cheating in the 21st Century. Cheating is certainly not new on campus, but the prevalence may be at an all-time high. 74% of business school undergraduates admit to having cheated at some point in college, compared with the 68% of the general student population. So if you're in a business school, you're more likely to cheat than if you're in other schools, according to this study. Students recognize that cell cheat sheets, phone text, writing answers on the inside of water bottle labels are wrong. However, cheating has become so common that some students don't even recognize it. In 2002, 40% of college students in one study did not think that cut and paste plagiarism from the internet was even moderate cheating. 47% of students do not think it's wrong to try to find out the answers from others who have already taken a particular test from a particular class. While students may become more creative, many researchers say the problem lies beyond the classroom, with students simply emulating what they see working in the real world. The prevailing thought among American students today is that if you don't cheat, you're already behind the curve, and you're at a distinct disadvantage. We face this regularly just related to fraudulent activity about chapel attendance. The student can walk out of chapel, walk right into the dining hall, skip going through the scanning process there, and not even think twice about it. When we confront them, oftentimes the response is, "How can you have the audacity to question my integrity?" There. Well, I want to tell you it's not all bad news. There's some good news too. I just bring this to you from none other than Rolling Stone magazine's June 2005 issue, which had Jessica Alba on the cover in tiny cutoffs and a midriff-bearing shirt. In an article titled "The Young and the Sexless," Rolling Stone magazine, of all magazines, explores a generation of Christian young people who are remaining virgins because of their faith. In it, the magazine questions if these young, hip, professional, and working adults might not be the real face of the Christian right, fighting a different culture war by saying no to the prevalent sexuality of their generation. Finding strength and accountability in community, these do not look like the prudish conservatives one might expect, but rather engage in most of the culture of their day, but choose to remain sexually pure. Borrowing from the language of the sexual revolution, the movement has gained ground among young adults, seeing faith, romance, and rebellion against cultural milieu as reasons to forgo sex for now, looking forward to something very good in the future. And if you're with me, which I know that you are, that is what we're about, is raising up a reaction against the culture, not just a reaction against the culture, but raising up those who will be change agents, who are marching to the beat of a different drummer. I'm going to invite Joni to come now and share with us about some developmental hurdles in the culture.